truly reconcile its past unless it deals with and acknowledges its turbulent history. Well, that's the word from President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking at the Day of Reconciliation celebrations in KwaZulu-Natal earlier this week. Among the deepest of historical problems remains that of race-based land ownership patterns. But how does South Africa move away from its past? How does President Cyril Ramaphosa help to push the agenda forward? Well, Peter Setou, who is the Chief Executive of Vumelana Advisory Fund, chats to us about land reform. Thanks very much for joining us, sir. So your organization is very much an advocator of partnerships being formed with people who receive land so that they can make the most of it in terms of getting the utmost use from it. Just tell us a little bit about that principle.
Yeah, Vumelana has been around since 2012. We are a non-profit public benefit organization. We assist excuse me, beneficiaries of land reform in order to really put their land to productive use. We do that through funding what we call transaction advisory services in order to attract investments, because we believe that it's only through that once you get in our private sector players, then it becomes a lot more easier to make sure that the land is productively utilized by for the benefit of the communities.
Yes. Now we know that a document has been put out for public comment by the end of January next year in terms of the way forward, in terms of this whole constitutional change of Section 25 and the land reform process. What are your views around that? And does the resolution of the Constitution necessarily directly deal with improving the land reform situation?
Well, as a starting point, I think Parliament should be commended for having kick-started this process of really publishing this important bill for comment. I mean, the bill does one or two things. One, it makes explicit that which is implicit, i.e. to ensure that, to make it possible for, for nil compensation, so to speak. It also makes provision for the courts to really make pronouncements on this nil compensation,
yes,
really empowering the courts to be able to do that. Thirdly, it makes provision for national legislation to be promulgated, really dealing with those specific circumstances under which land may be expropriated at nil compensation, so to speak.
So once that happens, assuming everything goes through, and it's likely to, because we have a majority, an ANC majority in the House, and the EFF would likely also support this bill. Once it happens, what then happens next? Because there has been land redistribution, but in many instances we hear stories about previously disadvantaged black people getting land but not being able to make full use of it, some people even selling the land on back to white people, and all of that, and not really making use of the land and contributing to food security and all of that. So what needs to happen, and how do organizations like yours help to further the cause?
Well, first of all, we would like to encourage South Africans to actually engage with this process, with the parliamentary process, by way of really making submissions on their own experiences, including what is it that they would like to see coming out of this whole process. That's the first thing. But however, it is important to highlight the fact that the constitutional amendments alone will not resolve some of the problems that are besetting the land reform space. There are a number of things that needs to happen in order to address challenges within the land reform space. I'll just mention quite a few, just briefly. Yeah. There is a need to make sure that once land is actually transferred to South Africans, it is used productively, i.e. don't give people the land without really giving them some level of support to make sure that they can use it productively. That's something that needs to happen. Two, the restitution process has got to be streamlined so that it doesn't take far too long for the restitution, for land to be restituted. I mean, we've had cases where sometimes it would take up to 10 years or so for these claims to be finalized. So we need to fine-tune that to make sure that it's expedited. There's also a need to increase the resources in order to support land reform beneficiaries more broadly. Because if we are to make sure that people can utilize their land, we need to make sure that they are capacitated, there's capacity building. We need to make sure that we really link them up through the markets. We need to make sure that they are supported. And as Vumelana, over the last couple of years, we have been supporting beneficiaries of land reform. And we are saying, you know, partnering with the private sector, with your private investors, is the most immediate way through which you can address challenges around land reform, because these are parties who've got access to resources, these are parties who've got access to, you know, to markets, and they've got the technical expertise.
Yes.
And over time, this can be the skills, etc., could be transferred to our communities.
So your organization is a non-profit, but if there are other partnerships with, say, the private sector, how would it be a win-win in terms of assisting those who are previously disadvantaged, who've got land, with implements, finance, know-how, and all of those things? How would you strike the balance so that it's a win-win? What would incentivize somebody to make that investment?
Well, we work through independent transaction advisors who are drawn, depending on the nature of the program or project that we are supporting. For example, if it's in agriculture, we'll rope in specialists, people who understand the environment, who understand the agriculture. Their role would be to really handhold and support the communities to identify the relevant would-be investors, to help them negotiate with these partners. Remember, you are dealing with two parties who are not equal. You know,
yes.
You've got the investor who's very sophisticated, and you've got your community which is less sophisticated. So the role of this independent transaction advisor is to really balance that and to make sure that it becomes a win-win situation for both the investor and for the community.
Peter, it does sound like you've got lots of solutions, for the future of agriculture in this country, and we'll talk to you further in the future. Thank you so much. That was Peter Setou. He's the Chief Executive of Vumelana Advisory Fund. Now, let's continue. Residents of these